I am Robert Creech, and I have been beginning my 11th year at Truett this year, teaching the area of practical theology. I was a pastor in Houston at University Baptist Church for 22 years, and down near Clear Lake, and came here to teach pastoral ministry and leadership 10 years, 11 years ago. Really have enjoyed being here. I'd like to know who you all are, and I'd also like to know why you're in here. So, when there are options about being other places. So, why don't we start over here?
Todd Lawless. I'm the music director at First United Methodist in Jasper.
Okay.
I think I'm actually, I come to the music ministry out of a career in band directing.
Okay.
And raised
Texas?
Texas and overseas.
Okay.
Raised as a Southern Baptist. When I moved back to my hometown a couple of years ago, I joined this church. My high school choir director was the choir director. I think he was kind of planning on me being his replacement when I retired, or when he retired. So for me, I'm seeing this as part of learning more about how to be more effective in ministry with my congregation.
Todd, have you done any reading or been exposed to family systems theory along the way anywhere?
No.
Okay. In your band directing, you wouldn't have run into Royce Creech, would you?
I know, when I saw your name, I was like, I know him, in Conroe, right?
Yeah,
Didn't he
over
teach in
in
Conroe?
that area, yeah, Shepherd, that direction.
Yes.
Yeah, he's the first cousin.
Okay, I
You've been
think
in that
we
all
were
the time.
in the same TMEA region
Okay.
at one time. I was in Klein for a little while, Klein ISD.
Glad you're here.
I'm Mark Rattray, and I have been in the same church about 15 years. Was hired as the director of worship and arts, still doing that role, but also taking on now the role of director of ministries for the last couple of years. And I'm in Columbia, South Carolina at St. Andrews Presbyterian. So I think we're going through some systemic and ministry discipleship changes that I'm kind of responsible for, and so helping to, this is a new idea to me, so just kind of thinking through navigating some of those changes within the context of our church family, and we are a multi-generational, multi-family church also.
Where?
In Columbia, South Carolina.
Glad you're here.
Thanks.
I'm Tom Reedy. I'm the music minister at Untitled Chapter, which is in a resort area about an hour up the road on Lake Whitney.
Okay.
I retired from the career in public accounting, which I think is probably a normal path to music ministry. So my sole qualification is singing chorally my whole life. Learned a lot of new people, so I'm just trying to soak up as much information as I possibly can. We're not multi-generational, we are.
One generational.
Okay.
The
My first issue when I'm looking for music is how high do the sopranos have to go?
And do you still want to use shake notes, right?
No, no shade notes. I do have some hymnals that are shake notes.
Clint Schofield, pastor of First Presbyterian over in Clifton, a small multi-generational church. I was exposed to and really came to appreciate systems theory as a medical chaplain at Scott and White Temple for several years, and then went into the full-time ministry call at Clifton. Really look forward to brushing up on this.
Okay.
I'm Jim Hahn. I am a lay minister. My primary job is teaching English high school. I'm from here in Waco, and I've been leading worship for a multi-generational but a a cappella tradition church, Church of Christ. So
Have
we
you
have
had
our
any-
own unique
Okay.
challenges.
Have you had any background or exposure to family systems theory at all?
No.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Good morning, my name is Dean Roy, and I am from Lubbock, Texas. My wife and I have been there about 25 years. I'm the associate minister Master of Music and Administration at Westmont Christian Church there. We're a church of about 200, so we're a small church. I am not familiar with this, but I have come here today eager to learn.
Okay, well, that helps me kind of know where we go. And this is about as multi-denominational a group I've represented in this room. So, well, I welcome all of you to Truett and to the conference and to this room today. And we've got 50 minutes, and that's not. This is a time. It's plenty of time to get introduced, but there's a lot of work to do to take this and do much with it. But hopefully, I'm going to give you some resources to do that. I think Randall Bradley invited me to do this because last January I had a book come out that is Family Systems in Congregational Life, and with Baker Academic, and so we come do some things relative to that. So this is more than I know about the subject. So let me tell you kind of how I got introduced to this, and we'll think about what it means to think about congregations as systems. And I think I found it to be such a useful way of thinking about the work that we do, because we deal with people. This is not about structures or denominations, it's about human beings, which is what we end up dealing with all the time. And we are one. So, and our families are made up of these folks as well. I got into this probably around 1994, actually. I read a book in right after it came out, 1988 or so, by Ed Friedman. Ed Friedman was a, let me see if I can skip around in this thing. So, there you go. Oops. Ed Friedman was a rabbi, and he had studied family systems with Murray Bowen. Murray Bowen was a psychiatrist after World War II, serving in the Army as a doctor. He came back and began doing research, particularly around schizophrenia. And he ran a really interesting experiment at the Manager Clinic. He had families living with a schizophrenic family member, living on the floor at the hospital with them. The family, I think there were 15 families that lived in the hospital and the patient. And Bowen and his staff were observing the interaction of how well the patient did relative to how the family was getting functioning and stuff. And out of that, in the 60s and 70s, he developed a theory. He was out to try to understand scientific theory of human behavior. He didn't think Freud and some of those predecessors had science behind them. And, they were often based on mythologies or, symbols. And Bowen was interested in grounding his understanding of human behavior in science, and in particular in biology. And so over time, he began to observe these consistent patterns he saw. And with a schizophrenic patient and family, that's pretty extreme behavior. So it was easier to see things in the extreme. But then he noticed that these same things were present in the families he saw in his clinical practice that were families like ours, that were just going in for marriage counseling, or my kid's acting out, or stuff like that. So over about 25 years, he developed a series of 8 called interlocking concepts that formed his theory. And Ed Friedman was one of his students, and he was a rabbi. And Ed was the first one to start applying this thinking to congregational life, and to understand that we learn everything we learn about how to get along and how to deal with people in our families. And we take that with us everywhere we go. We take it into our businesses, we take it into our friendships, we take it into our congregation. And that Friedman began to understand that congregations behave very much like Bowen said families behave. And that the more we could understand our own role in our own family and understand how humans behave in that way, the better we could do with leading and ministering to these folks who are part of our congregation. So I read his book. It's called Generation to Generation. I read that right after it came out at a recommendation of a friend, and I thought, well, this is interesting, but I don't know what in the world to do with it. I really didn't. And at that time, there was no internet, and there was no place to go looking further, and I couldn't find anything there was no Amazon.com, you know, just, so I kind of shelved it and said, maybe I'll, I don't know what to do with this, but it's interesting. And then about 5 years later, my family began to suffer some symptoms of, I had a son that was acting out, and stuff was going on in our congregation. It was like there was incoming from every direction. My dad died 13 months later, my mother died. I had an issue going on with a teenage son, and then Congregational had an associate on our staff who was caught in a clergy sexual abuse event. All of that's happening within about a 6-month period. And so stress and anxiety is pretty high. I remember this book. Maybe I'll pull that off and read again, and I did. And then said, maybe I need some help with this. And I found one of Murray Bowen's students who was operating she had her practice there in Houston, both educational as well as clinical. And I started going to see Victoria Harrison as a coach. That's what they tend to refer to their folks as. They coach us in family life and relationships. So I started seeing her and learning about this, and it really became life-saving for me, I believe, and my congregation and my family. I just want you to know, I didn't get into this because I thought it was a nifty idea. It was, I needed something to help me get my head together and to stop swirling what was going on in life, and this helped very much. And so, as it turns out, this has begun to be a very helpful tool that clergy have used in a lot of places. You mentioned you came across this in clinical work at a hospital, right? A lot of seminaries offer this. It's often in CPD programs, in training chaplains, and so now there's developing pretty decent bibliography. So there are places to go read, there are places to get training, a lot of stuff that wasn't around 12, 15 years ago. One of the things that Friedman said was that clergy are members of 3 family systems. There is, to back that up, we are a member of our own family. And what goes on in our family, with our marriage, with our kids, whether they're living in the home with us or their adult children living away, what goes on in our own family we're affected by that, and we affect it. We take that with us wherever we go, and so the second family we're part of are the families within the congregation. What's going on in their life has its impact, and then the family that is the congregation is the third family, and these things intersect. This was Friedman's idea. And so that when I learned to work on if things are going south in the congregation, for example, as pastor, I am affected by it. My anxiety goes up. I take that home with me. My family's affected by that. What's going on in my family affects me. I take that to church to work with me, and it affects my relationships with others if it's running unconsciously, not out of my awareness. Or if there are key families in the church that are going through difficult things, the congregation is affected by that, and the pastor and staff there's some of that. So you can say, this is not rocket science, is it? It's just recognition. We live our lives in connection with each other. What goes on with one of us affects all of us. And so this has been pretty popular with clergy for a lot of reasons. One is that it's readily available. There's stuff to read, there are places to go study, and BFST stands for Bowen Family Systems. Murray Bowen put his name on there finally because there were other family systems theory that were coming up, and he really wanted to distinguish his work from some of these others because he was, as I say, trying to ground it in biology. And another one is it's understandable. It is not, there are only a handful of things to grasp to get a sense of, I think I get what the theory's about. And we want to get a chance to run through those. This has been one of the reasons why I find it useful, especially in leadership. There's another book that I co-authored with a couple of friends about 10 years ago, and it's coming out in January in a second edition. It's called The Leader's Journey, and it is written for clergy, particularly around applying the theory to leadership in the congregation. And and I use that when I teach a leadership class here. And one of the reasons is a lot of the leadership material that's out there, and there's a ton of it, which tells you we haven't figured this out yet. I mean, there, I don't know. Just Google leadership on Google or enter it in a search in Amazon and see how many hits you get, which
Mhm.
tells you we're very interested in it, and if we got it figured out, there wouldn't be so much being done. So, but for example, John Maxwell, who is very popular, has a book called 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. That's probably a very good book, but I don't know, I can't carry 21 laws around in my head and think in a given situation, is this law number 17 or law number 6? I don't remember which one applies to. But Bowen theory provides me with a way of thinking about human behavior. So I don't have to remember a bunch of laws. There's some pretty simple things. That's one of the subtitle of the book I wrote is called A Map for Ministry, because that's the way I think about the theory, is it sort of provides me a map. The territory is human relationships, and the map, which helps me navigate the territory, is a way of thinking about human relationships. And so it's one of the reasons I think it's been popular with clergy, is it's understandable. It's also compatible with mainline biblical and theological perspectives. It's not a philosophy, it's not a theology, it's science. And I've included in the book a chapter in there on Bowen theory and Christian theology and how they kind of intersect and dialogue with each other in some ways. And there are a couple of chapters in there where I take the patriarch's family, Abraham all the way to Joseph, and also David's family, because those are two extended families we have a lot of biblical information about. And just use the theory to help me read what's going on in those stories. Turns out, and Bowen said this is about human behavior. It is the product of our evolutionary past. It is the way our brains are wired up. It's not white human behavior, it's not 21st century human behavior, it's not North American human behavior. It applies across time, across cultures, and because it's the way humans have, it's the way we function. And so you can go back and read this ancient Near Eastern text of Genesis and find this same things happening there in the lives of the patriarchs or in David's life that we find going on in our congregation. So it's compatible. And the other thing is that the focus of using theory is that it is a focus on oneself. It is, this is the only person I can manage. And so in the anxiety in my family and the anxiety in my congregation, I focus on being a responsible presence there, not on what other people should do. This is not something to use to manipulate other people. It doesn't work that way. It's how do you maintain yourself as when Friedman used the term a non-anxious presence. And I get what he's saying. I don't totally like that, because I don't think there's such thing as a non-anxious person, except in cemeteries maybe. But to be a calmer presence is the way we can have influence on people. Murray Bowen one time told one of his colleagues, all you have to do is be the calmest person in the room and you can be helpful. That's a workable goal for me in business meetings and committee meetings and staff meetings and such as that, is how can I be the calmest person there? How can I manage myself so that, because when we're calmer, we can think. And if we calm down and we're leaders, the system calms down somewhat. If we had time, I would play you this video and this tape. Do you know the name Tammy Jo Schultz? You probably don't remember her name, but you remember the story. April a year ago, she was Southwest Airlines pilot flying from New York back to Texas, I think, and she had an engine blowout on the left wing. The engine exploded and burst the glass. A passenger was sucked out, and she had this plane to land. Well, Tammy Jo Schultz is a member of First Baptist Church Ernie, which is where I'm interim pastor for the last year. So I've got to know her and her husband Dean. And there's a recording, you can find it on the internet. Just listen to her conversation with the tower and with her cabin during that crisis. And to hear her calm voice and her assuring these people, the plane is flyable, we're gonna land it. And when she's communicating with the tower, you hear the anxiety in the voice of the air traffic controller, but she's just this calm leader in this crisis. And it makes a real difference. I mean, you don't want to be on a plane and have a pilot come on and go, "Oh my God! Got an instrument out, I don't know what I'm gonna do." Well, and people don't need that from their leaders and their choirs and committees and congregations. A calm leader who has a sense of managing themselves in the midst of the crisis. It's really important, crisis leadership, but it's important. Managing yourself is what this is about. It's not about manipulating other people, but it is often helps us understand other people, which it helps us cut them some slack and give them some grace. You know, this is one thing I discovered about myself. On most days, when I get out of bed in the morning, and this has been true all my adult life, I think I want to do the best I can today. Now, that doesn't mean I never get up and look, see if I can screw up my kids today. See if I can go cause trouble at church today. I don't get up with that intention. Do I sometimes do those things? Of course I do. But on most days, I'm doing the best I can with what I've got to work with my level of, with the pressure that I'm dealing with the preparation I've got, with the person I am. So I sort of realized that, and I realized, that's probably true of most of the people I'm around too. Most people are doing the best they can with what they've got to work with at the time. And I generally don't know what they're working with. I don't know what they're up against. And so it's kind of helped me cut other people a little more slack and go, that's really bad behavior. But you know what? If I knew a little more about what was going on in your life right now, I probably would get it. And so I can not have to be so quick to identify somebody else as the problem and think more about the system that's going on. One of the other things is that has made this popular is it lets me think about a pretty wide variety of issues without having to be an expert in everything. I don't have to be an expert counselor. I don't have to be an expert marriage counselor. I don't have to be an expert leader. I don't have to be an expert in organizational theory. I just try to understand human beings and how we behave and work on managing myself in that. And I can be useful in most situations. Useful, not an expert. So it's been like that. Let me tell you a story, and then we can look at some of the pieces of the theory. This, I could tell you a story about, I'll give you a bad day story and a good day story. Okay, so this is pretty early after I went to the church in Houston. I was in my late 30s and had no knowledge of any of this, just doing the best I can, what I had to work with. We were going through a lot of changes in the church, which incidentally, it's kind of a fine print in every invitation the church extends to pastors, often staff members, is, we want to reach young people. We want people with, young children. We want to do this. They've got all this. That's what we want. Well, obviously, if what you were doing were accomplishing that, then you wouldn't have that as a want, right? So obviously, what you're doing is not accomplishing that. So you're asking, we want to do that. So you're asking for what? Change. But the fine print, the contract says, we want all this, and we will do everything in our power to keep it from happening. That's the way systems work. It's called homeostasis. They get balanced in a certain way. This is the way to do things. And to change that in any way disturbs the system. It creates what Bowen will refer to as anxiety. And then human beings behave in a certain way as we become more anxious. So here I was thinking that they were serious when they said they wanted to do some things, and so I was introducing changes. It was really the first church I was ever pastor of. It was a large church. I'd been pastor of an inner city church, and I taught at a university. I was interim pastor of this church for 6 months, and then they called a pastor who stayed a couple of years. Then they called me back and asked me to be their pastor. So I went there at age 34, and the lots of ideas, very little experience, and less wisdom. So, started introducing these changes. I mean, the smallest change we made, and you'll get this, is that we got a new hymnal. This was, it was a Baptist hymnal. I mean, it was the new edition, but that means we're singing different songs. It means some songs we used to sing aren't in there. There's songs, you know, that was one of the minor changes, but even that one raised the level of anxiety. And there were other changes going on as we were trying to adapt to our mission. So there was a lot of anxiety in the congregation, which I did not understand. One of our more senior members, he was probably only in his 50s at the time. It wasn't a very old church. But he was the vice president for an aerospace company. His son, this was during the first Gulf War, his son was a Marine and had been deployed to the Middle East. His daughter had been a rebellious family member for a long time. She was using drugs very heavily. She had twin daughters and she was not married. And her mom, dad, our church member, was raised in their 50s, had these twin little girls in their house. The man, Bill, had a heart attack. When I was interim pastor there, he had open heart surgery, and I sat with him through open heart surgery. And then a couple years later, while I was his pastor, he had to have open heart surgery again. And the aerospace industry was going through a hard time, and he had personally laid off several hundred people from his company. So here is Bill's life, right? And I was trying to be a good pastor to him. I went over to their house and prayed when the son got deployed. I sat and talked with them about their daughter. I had been with him during his heart surgery. But I had no concept of the level of anxiety that was going on. And he was a prominent leader in the church. And we're going through changes. His life is going through serious changes. And the last thing he wants to change is the church. And so he became the most vocal opponent of the changes and got pretty angry and pretty good temper. I went to church, went to office one weekday morning, and a secretary whose husband was a deacon in the church said, "Do you know about the meeting at Bill's house?" And I said, "No, what meeting is that?" She said, "Well, Bill's called a meeting of the deacons to talk about the church." And I said, "I don't know anything about that." She said, "Well, just thought you might want to know." So, thanks for the heads up. So I go back to my office, and I decide, call Bill's office, and the secretary answers and said, "Is he in?" He's in a meeting right now. So I'm his pastor. When he gets a chance, I'd like to talk to him. She said, "Let me see if he can touch you down." But she pulls him out of the meeting, and I say to him, "I've heard this. Is this true?" He starts denying it. No, really. I said, "Well, the person who told me said they got an invitation. Their husband got an invitation from you to come to this meeting." So, we're going to have a meeting. It's no big deal. And I said, "Well, I'm a pastor of the church. I really think I ought to be present for talking about our church's future." So finally, I weaseled an invitation to this meeting. And, again, I'm 37. Scared to death. And the meeting was set up for a Sunday night. I drove over there, and I thought that I would be walking into they had big houses in that community, and he had one of them. And I thought I might be walking into a meeting of 50 angry people. I mean, I was prepared for that. I got there were 4 couples there. And I sat and talked with them about all their issues for several hours. Eventually, 2 of the couples left the church, ironically joining a church that was already doing many of the things that we were changing to do, which tells you the issue is seldom the issue. It is more often the emotional process going on than it is content. But that was now, and Bill and his wife were one of those that left. Some years later, with a lot more experience and a little more wisdom, I went back over to Bill's house, and they were members of our church anymore, but I said to him, sorry, if I'd been a more mature pastor a few years ago, you might have been able to stay connected to your church. And he said, well, if I'd been a more mature deacon, I might have found a way to stay connected anyway. And so we sort of made peace with him. He's on the other side now. But that was what I would say a bad day. Here's what's going on. Anxiety that I didn't recognize, not knowing that it produces certain symptoms in the system, and dealing with the content of people's complaints rather than the emotional process. A better pastor then would have turned the volume way up on pastoral care for Bill's family. They were going through more stuff than I could imagine, and I didn't get that. I thought I'd done enough, and so doing the best you can with what you have to work with. Okay, fast forward, gosh, a long time, 15 years or more. Another senior adult. This guy is a real senior adult. He's like, by this time, Frank is in his early 80s. He is retired from Boeing. He helped design Air Force One. He was an engineer. Came to Christ late in his life. His wife attended our church and he came with her, but he was not a believer and would tell you that he wasn't, but he attended with her. And then he started playing golf with one of our associate pastors on a regular basis, and sometimes I would play with them, and we had lots of really good conversations. But the time came where he made an appointment to come to our to the office one meeting with me and the other associate pastor, and what's up, Frank? He said, I want what you guys have. And he made a profession of faith. I baptized him when he was probably in his late 70s. And so in a sense, his loyalties in the church were stronger with the staff than they were with his senior adult cohort, you know, his Sunday school class and such as that. That's not often the case, you know, with seniors. You know, that they tend to, pastors come and go and we stay. You know? So Frank came to my office one day and he said, Robert, I said, he came in, and you could tell he was nervous. And I said, what's going on, Frank? He said, well, I got to tell you that down in our Sunday school class, they're just saying some awful things about you. Really? What are they saying? He said, well, they're saying you don't believe in Jesus anymore. Really? So this was a sign to me that whatever the issue was, this was not it. Okay, my Christology had not changed. No changes in my doctrine. So whatever issue Frank's about to unload to me is an emotional one, not a content one. And so I said, tell me about that. Well, I had preached a sermon a few weeks earlier where I said something like, I've looked through the New Testament and I can't find a single place where Jesus ever instructs someone to ask him into their heart. He keeps saying, follow me. That's what he says to him. And that Christian life is not an experience, it's a lifestyle. And it is following Jesus. And so I was, you know, making that point in the sermon. Every sermon's part heresy just because you can't say everything that needs to be said in 25 minutes. But someone had picked up on that, and it was, well, he doesn't believe you have to believe in Jesus to be a Christian anymore or something like that. So that's what was circulating. Well, it struck me, for what, so this is about managing myself. On an earlier or a bad day, I would have done what I did with Bill. I would have made a phone call. I would say, tell me their names. And I would make phone calls. I would arrange to talk to them and try to convince them that my doctrine was supple. But I understood this was not about that. This is about something else. I had a clue about what it was about. We'd had a retirement take place within the last year off our staff, a man named George, who'd been there something like 28 years. And he had worn every hat on the church staff except senior pastor over time. And he had been with these senior adults that whole time. They had built the church together. The church was just started in 1974. And George came on there like 75 or 76. And so I had been wondering what impact on the system is George's retirement going to have? I mean, I could predict it will have one. I just don't know what it's going to be. So I'm sort of on the lookout for that. And it struck me as I was talking with Frank that morning that these senior adults, all the changes we've been through for all the stuff, they always knew George was in the staff meeting. They always knew George had their back. They always knew George cared about them. And now George is gone. So I think they were just getting anxious about who's got our back, who cares about us. And when that happens, when the anxiety rises, something's going to pop. And so I saw that as possibly this. So Frank told me all this, and I said, well, I'll tell you what, Frank, here's what I think might be happening. And I told him what I just told you. He said, really? I said, yeah. So let's run an experiment. I think that who knows you came to talk to me? He says, just my wife. I said, okay, you and your wife, don't tell anybody else about this. Let's run next week. I think that if for the next several weeks between worship services, if I go down and drink coffee with those folks and listen to them and talk to them about their grandkids and my grandkids and about fishing, I mentioned fishing because I knew the ringleader of that. Because after a time, you know these things. And he was a big fisherman. So I think in a month or so, I'll be Orthodox again. And he said, you think so? I said, yeah, it can't hurt. And now, if I did that to manipulate, it would have bitten me. I really did love these people. I've been with them for 15 to 18 years or something. These were dear people to me. But I was able, on that moment, on a good day, to see their behavior as not just gossip and rumor and sinful behavior, but as anxious behavior, and that they needed a pastor. And so I began to go down and love on them. And sure enough, it all just evaporated. You know, it disappeared. That was a big lesson for me, is to pay attention to what's going on emotionally in the system. So here is for what we can do in 20 minutes. And by the way, if you interrupt me, it's not an interruption. Or we talk about anything. There's no way to get through all of this, what we could talk about. But here, this picture is a picture of a Calder mobile. The Calder mobiles are famous pieces of art. Well, the thing about a mobile is it's got all these pieces connected together, and they reach a place of balance where they always assume that position. Now, left to itself, it will stay that way. If it gets disturbed, it'll eventually get back to that same position, just gravity doing its work. But if you were to grab one of those pieces and pull it to a new position and hold it there, what's going to happen to the other pieces in the mobile?
Shift.
They'll shift some way or another. The whole weight of the system is pulling, so that if you let go, it's going to go back to where it was. But if that new position could be held, everybody else has to adjust to that. That make sense? Well, Murray Bowen said that's the way, he didn't compare it to a mobile, but he says the same thing about human systems. This is one sentence in one of his books, and I've broken it down into pieces because it's such a large sentence, but this is the kind of a core understanding of systems thinking. When any key member of an emotional system can, 1, control his own emotional reactiveness, and 2, accurately observe the functioning of the system and his part in it, and 3, can avoid counterattacking when he's provoked, and 4, can maintain an active relationship with the other key members without withdrawing or becoming silent, then the entire system will change in a series of predictable steps. Well, that's easy to do, isn't it? All you have to do is be able to manage yourself, see the part you play in what's going on, not counterattack when you're provoked, remain in contact with the other members, and not withdraw and become silent, and then the system will change in a series of predictable steps. Well,
And move the church building 3 inches to the left.
exactly. That's not easy to do. It's easy to understand, but the actual doing of it, the reason it's hard to do is because of what it means to be part of an emotional system. We are connected with one another in just these powerful ways. I'm going to see if this is what I want to look at here. The word emotional, when Bowen uses that, does not refer to feelings primarily, like we use it in common language. He uses it to refer to things that emanate from a particular part of our brain. They're automatic responses. You could almost substitute the word instinctual for emotional. It's the stuff we do without thinking. It is the reactions we give to one another without processing them logically. So there's the emotional part of our brain that responds automatically, and then there's the intellectual part of our brain that processes stuff, prefrontal cortex. Bowen said that by far the large amount of human behavior is emotional. It comes from a part of the brain that and then we use our thinking part of the brain to give a reason for why we did just what we did. With my son, we were involved in recovery movement for a while, and they have all these little aphorisms and definitions of things. One of the definitions I like very much was the definition of rationalize. It means to tell rational lies. That we act and then we come up with a rationale for it, right? Emotional response is just that we are constantly involved in automatic reactions to one another. And these are the kind of things that in a family are going on. Is in Bowen's stuff, when they illustrate things, they use squares to represent men and circles to represent women. If you go to the Bowen Center for the Study of Family in Georgetown, even the restrooms are labeled that way. There's a square of the men's room, circle. But imagine this as a family. We can just, for illustration's sake, say these are the parents right here. And so this is a man and a woman, and they've got 2 boys and 2 girls. And what makes an emotional system is when people are together for over a long period of time, an emotional system forms. They begin to react to each other. So family is the most intense form of an emotional system. A work system, a work organization or congregation are less intense, but they're the same way. If we're together for a period of time, we begin to be sensitive to each other, reacting to each other automatically. And that's what he means by an emotional system. And this is not just true of humans. This is true down through all of creation, down to single cellular creatures react automatically in emotional systems. Back to humans. So the kind of things that we're constantly monitoring below the level of consciousness with important people in our life is things like this. Who's dependent upon me, and do I want them depending on me or not? Who am I dependent upon, and are they dependable? What are the others' expectations of me, and am I meeting their expectations? And what do I expect of others, and are they meeting my expectations? Whose attention do I want, and am I getting it? Who's asking for my attention, do I want to give it? Whose approval am I seeking, and who's seeking my approval, and is that happening? Who's in distress, and do they need me, and do I want to be needed? I mean, that stuff, and probably 1,000 other things, are just constantly running in our head below the level of consciousness. And we are then responding that way, and we respond to each other, and the other responds back, and so this whole thing is just a swirling thing all the time. And it's true in congregations as well. So imagine, for example, a less emotionally mature family, okay? They might have a day that looks like this. Dad comes home from work, and he's had a good day at work. Things have gone well, he made a presentation that was well received. Things just went smoothly. David took off a little early, beat the traffic home, came home and found the kids were already home from school. The boys were out shooting baskets. One of the girls was in her room working on homework. The other one was chatting with her friends online, and they get, Mom, Howard, let's say she's a high school counselor, and she's had a tough day. She's dealt with what she thinks is an incompetent principal, and she's had parents on her back, and she's had students in her office, and a lot of paperwork to do, and she actually had to work late. She got caught in the traffic. She gets home, parks the car in the garage. When she walks in the door, does anybody have to tell everybody else that Mom's had a tough day? Now, we pick that stuff up. It's, you know, a raised eyebrow, a facial expression, how hard the door was opened or closed, the tone of voice, the pitch of the voice, all that stuff, we just automatically pick up on. And what might happen on this, if this is a less mature family, is that although things were running pretty well, when Mom gets home, she walks in, she sees there's nobody started dinner, and she walks into the kitchen and starts opening drawers and slamming things and getting stuff out. These two guys that were shooting baskets get into a fight. This girl who was doing her homework, she was working online, may decide that she hears all that going on in the kitchen. She gets up and goes into the kitchen to see if she can help because her mom's in distress. This one may decide to go off to her room and get away from this, and Dad may decide it's a good time to go to the study and check stock market online and get out of there. Now, that would be a less mature family, pretty much like most of ours. So, but if there was a higher degree of what Bowen called emotional maturity going on here, what could have happened is same day, right? But Mom gets up, she's a more emotional mature person than in the previous thing, and when she pulls into the garage, she may go, oh, this has been a hard day. Before I go in my family, let me just see if I can manage myself a little bit. And she may find a way to calm, she knows how to calm herself down, she knows what to do, pray, breathe deeply, or just sit there for a while, whatever. And she gets up finally, and goes in. The boys will keep playing basketball without breaking into a fight. When they walk in, she's still stressed. And he's more likely to notice that, and instead of withdrawing, he moves toward her and says, looks like you might have had a hard day, tell me about it. And yeah, well, why don't we get some takeout tonight or go out to eat or something, or let's go to the kitchen, I'll help you, we'll get supper started. He would have moved toward her instead of away in that thing, and it's likely the kids would have just gone on with their life. But there is a spectrum, Bowen said, of what he called emotional maturity. He used the term differentiation of self, but it is the degree to which we are aware of and the difference between our automatic responses and our intellectual responses, how we could choose our behavior as opposed to just automatically generating it. And churches are just like this. Leadership meetings, deacons meetings, and elder boards, and they all function just like this. We are monitoring each other, and where there is present a more mature, calmer leader, then those folks get to function better. And we don't do it to manipulate them, we do it to manage ourselves. We work on ourselves in that. Let me tell you what's in the handout there. I'm going to probably just have to leave it at that. But, you can, I think, read these and get the gist of some of the things I've been talking about. But there are two kinds of anxiety that Bowen talked about. One is acute and one is chronic. Acute anxiety is what God built into us as an automatic response to threat, and it's necessary for survival. And so when we perceive threat, we automatically respond to it. This is not a time to pull out a yellow legal pad, make 2 columns of pros and cons, and think through stuff. We need to, if there's a rattlesnake in our path, our automatic response is what we depend on. If a car pulls out in front of us at an intersection, it is our automatic responses to threat that we depend on, and those are very rapid, and they are chemical, and in a split second our body's flooded with a variety of chemicals in that stress response that allow us to act. We get tunnel vision, so we can only see the threat and the way out. Our digestive system shuts down, blood flows to the larger muscles of our body so that we can respond more strongly. There's a whole bunch of things that happen just like that. Now that's fine with automatic, and then it'll calm down. The chemicals will readjust and go back to normal state pretty soon. But acute chronic anxiety is where we live in a constant state of sensing threat or fear. And God did not create us to live that way, but we do. All of us do. And so we live with those toxic, corrosive chemicals in our body as some constant ambient level all the time. And that's called chronic anxiety. And so some level of chronic anxiety is present, and some level of emotional maturity that we have is present. And to look at this is, let's say this is a 3-gallon vessel, and the level of anxiety, it only takes 3 gallons plus a few drops more before something spills over, before there's a symptom. A more mature person could handle more stress and anxiety without producing a symptom. Given enough stress and anxiety, they'll produce a a symptom, it'll overflow. And so the two things that we can work on when we start noticing symptoms, which I will have time to tell you those really brief. When we notice symptoms of anxiety present, we work on two things. One is how do we lower the level of anxiety? And the other is, over time, how do we increase the level of emotional maturity? And congregations, I don't recommend working on a congregation, I recommend working on ourselves. How do I increase my level of emotional maturity? How do I lower my level of anxiety? Here's one of the most useful things that I have learned from this, and you can, is that if you look over the third page, and it's number 3, it's Bowen's third concept, family emotional process. Bowen said that human beings have only 4, some people say 5 because they divide one of those, automatic emotional responses to anxiety. In other words, our repertoire as humans, of what we can do when anxiety rises, is really small. We have 4 things we can do. You may be familiar with fight or flight. Those are 2 of them. Freeze is a 3rd one. But Bowen identified these. And when anxiety rises, and it surpasses our capacity to contain it, the symptoms we will produce in a family or in a congregation are these. One, or sometimes we'll do one specializing one, and it's very strong, or sometimes we may do all of these. One is conflict, that conflict will break out. It's what we pay most attention to because it's scary. Most of us don't like conflict, and churches call it, and organizations call it conflict managers and all that. But it's a symptom of something else. It is a symptom of rising anxiety. Just as the rumors circulating about my lack of orthodoxy were symptoms of rising anxiety among a group of people. It wasn't the problem, it was a symptom of the problem. Now, when a symptom appears, it causes more anxiety, and conflict creates anxiety all by itself, right? So it becomes a vicious cycle, and the anxiety gets spiraled. But conflict is one. When conflict breaks out, you find yourself arguing with your wife or your kid or your, somebody. It's not a bad idea to ask yourself, what changed? Why did we not have this argument yesterday? Why today? What's changed emotionally? Often it's easy to pick out, I'm just dealing with a lot more stress than usual, so I'm walking around with a chip on my shoulder just looking for somebody to argue with. We do that. And so do other people. So conflict is one. Distance. This would be like dad withdrawing to the study to check the stock market. It's a way of dealing with anxiety as we want to get out of it. So we remove ourselves from it. You can do that physically, but you can do that emotionally. You can do that by closing your office door. You can do it by not responding to emails and text messages. You can do it by not returning phone calls. There are a lot of ways. You can do it by playing with your phone in a staff meeting. There are a lot of ways to express distance as a response. Third is over-under functioning, which is where somebody starts thinking for and acting for others. That's the over-functioner, and there's always an under-functioner who lets them do that. And usually both parties agree the under-functioner is the problem, but they go on doing it anyway. Think about an alcoholic family where the alcoholic husband, say, is not going into work because he's drunk, and the wife calls the boss and makes excuses for him. That's over-under functioning. They both agree he's the problem, but they're both continuing to play their roles. And so when anxiety rises, over-functioners tend to become overly responsible, tell people how to think and taking over things for them, and under-functioners become irresponsible during higher anxiety. During lower anxiety, they both tend to be kind of normal. The symptomatic spouse is the subdivision of the previous one. That is, in families, one spouse often takes on a symptom, either physical or emotional or social, as a kind of under-functioning thing. I just tend to work with conflict, distance, over-under-functioning, and the last one, which is triangling or projection. This often takes the form of projecting the problem on one person. So there's blame involved in that. Sometimes it's rumors and gossip that are forms that projection takes. You know, I'm sure this is not true in other denominations, but Baptists, like, we have a saying that when the devil fell from heaven, he landed in the choir. You ever heard that? No, you know, we find some part of the congregation to blame. It's the music, it's the youth ministry, it is the pastor. We find that's projection, and it's a sign of anxiety. The point is that when I think of these as instruments, like on my dashboard, normally there's a little bit of conflict and there's some distance, and the needles are never at zero, right? Because we live with anxiety, we're not fully mature people. But when you start seeing one or more of those needles move on the dashboard, it doesn't do any good to grab the needle and move it back to zero, because the needle is only an indicator of something else going on. The needle is an indicator that anxiety has risen. And so as a thoughtful person, what I hope I would do as I see conflict increasing or distance in my family or in my congregation is to stop and ask the question, what's changed? And what's my part in it? And what part do I want to play in this right now? If normally the issue is not the issue, when it is the issue, you know it. If you've screwed up and somebody's mad at you for screwing up, you know you screwed up. And so you go apologize, you mend fences, and you do that. But when you start getting these kind of irrational rumors, accusations, demands, that is pretty much an indicator that it's not about what it's about. It's about something else. And to try to just deal with the issue is like playing guacamole. I mean, if you've ever done that, it's like you wash it down over here, well, we've got the conflict dealt with. Well, that anxiety is going to express itself maybe in distance now, one of the other things. But if you don't deal with anxiety and manage yourself in that, then the issue keeps, you know, it just changes. So that is one of the more useful things that I've grasped out of this as far as congregational work is concerned, is I watch for those things in myself and in others. And when I find one of those is increasing, that helps me wonder what's changed, where's the source of this anxiety, and what's my best response to that. That's, we could talk about these things for a long time, but you'll find there Bowen's 8 concepts and some suggested action items and a reading list. And if you've got more interest in that, then there are places to go and think about it. I will just underscore my testimony one more time. This has been a very useful way of thinking about human behavior. It's been useful to me and my family. It's been useful as a pastor. And I think it's been useful to the congregations that I work with. And it's worth pondering. Best book on the market here. But there are some really, there's some good thinkers and writers in that field, and you have some interest in that. You can find stuff online too, YouTube videos and all kinds of things. But Roberta Gilbert, who's one of the writers in that area, she studied with Bowen. She's a daughter of a Baptist pastor. She said, you know, one of her kind of mantras is, if you know theory, you can use theory. If you don't know it, you can't use it. And just learning a little bit about it makes it possible that we can use that in important relationships in our life and be a more responsible person in those relationships. And that takes work. This is not something that we do just because we read a book. I take this at got a chapter there on spiritual formation and family systems theory. I take working on my family and myself and my family as a spiritual discipline. I think it's right in there with fasting, prayer, silence, and solitude, and some of those other classical disciplines, is because it is about personal transformation. It's not about a nifty set of ideas or tools to manipulate somebody with. It is about how do I become a different person so that the systems I'm a part of are affected by that. So when you find yourself using this to work on your kids or your wife or your deacons or elders, you've got a misplaced thing there, and we're not working on systems at that point. We're working on